Well, welcome today. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Here's what's coming up within the hour. 3 empty buses explode in southern Tel Aviv in what Israeli police call a suspected terror attack. Israeli military says body returned from Gaza is not Shiri Biba's. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu pledges to eliminate Hamas. Plus, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says Ukraine needs reliable and clear security guarantees to end the war. The World Today starts now. Welcome again. There's been a suspected terror attack in Tel Aviv, Israel. Police say 3 buses, although empty, exploded on the southern edge of the town. According to officials, it happened in an area where the buses were parked in the city of Bat Yam on Thursday night. There have been no casualties reported. Apparently, devices on 2 other buses failed to explode, and one of the buses carried a message referring to revenge for a recent Israeli raid on a refugee camp in the occupied West Bank. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, in response, has ordered the Israeli military to carry out an intensive operation against what he calls centers of terrorism in the West Bank. Meanwhile, shortly after the explosions, police spokesperson Aryeh Doron warned the public to be on alert for every suspected bag or object. In the meantime, Israel has accused Hamas of violating the ceasefire deal after forensic testing revealed the body returned from Gaza on Thursday is not that of Shiri Biba's. The Israel Defense Forces say 3 other bodies handed over have been identified as her sons, Ariel and Kefir, who have been aged 5 and 2, and that of peace activist 84-year-old Oded Lifshitz. However, the 4th body is neither Shiri's nor another hostage. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is alleging that Hamas put the body of a Gazan woman in a coffin. Responding to this, the Hamas group says it would investigate what led to the wrong remains being sent to Israel, as it seems Shiri's had been mixed up with other bodies under the rubble of a structure after an Israeli airstrike. They also reiterated their previous statements, which said the children and their mother were killed in an Israeli bombing. According to Israeli intelligence and forensics, the boys were brutally murdered by terrorists in captivity in November of 2023. Following the handover of the bodies on Thursday, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu spoke to the nation, calling for unity in this time of grief, a grief he says is too heavy to bear. Mr. Netanyahu vows that the Hamas group will be eliminated in light of the wrong body being sent to Israel. He also pledges that all hostages will be returned. He says in spite of Israeli hearts being broken, their spirits will not be.
Dear citizens of Israel, we are all united in grief that is too heavy to bear. Every home in Israel bows its head over the heavy loss of 4 of our hostages. We all feel pain mixed with rage. We are all outraged at the Hamas monsters. The 4 coffins of our dear ones require us, more than ever, to swear that what happened on October 7th never reoccurs. Our hearts may be broken, but our spirit is not. And with the spirit, we will return all of our hostages. We will destroy the murderers. We will eliminate Hamas. And together, with God's help, we will ensure our future.
Ordinary Israelis on Thursday were out on the streets to pay their respects as the bodies being carried in emergency vehicles passed by the streets of Tel Aviv. Dozens of them were gathered just in front of the National Center for Forensic Medicine in Tel Aviv. 4 bodies returned this week are the bodies of deceased hostages returned by the Islamist organization Hamas. The 4 coffins were supposed to contain the remains of oldest captive, 83-year-old Oded Lifshitz, and 2 of the youngest, Kefir and Ariel Bibas, who were 9 months and 4 years old, respectively, at the time, united in death with their mother, Shiri, who was just 32 years old in 2023. They all belonged to kibbutz near Oz, located very close to the Palestinian enclave and the hardest hit by the Hamas commando assault, with some 30 dead and 70 hostages taken.
I came here today to give the last respect to the death, the hostages that killed by the monsters, the Hamas. And it's very important for me because my father is a Holocaust survivor, and it's like to close a circle, you know, to say we are all as a unit. We have to be together. We have to be together. It doesn't matter your skin color. If we'll be together, no Hamas and no one can hurt us.
The United Nations condemned the manner in which the bodies returned to Israel were handled. Spokesperson for the UN Secretary-General, Stefan Dujarric, said Mr. Antonio Guterres condemned the parading of bodies and displaying of the coffins of the deceased Israeli hostages by Hamas, calling it abhorrent and appalling. He also reiterated that under international law, any handover of the remains of deceased people or deceased individuals, must comply with the prohibition of cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment, ensuring respect for the dignity of the deceased and their families.
Now, there is some hope on the horizon as 6 hostages are expected.
The ceasefire agreement between Hamas and Israel, we have seen how Hamas handed over the bodies of a mother and 2 children from the Bibas family, as well as that of an 84-year-old man. I can tell you that the Secretary General condemns the parading of bodies and displaying of coffins of the deceased hostages in this manner this morning, which is both abhorrent and appalling. Under international law, any handover of the remains of deceased must comply with the prohibition of cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment, ensuring respect for the dignity and the deceased and their families. The Secretary General reiterates his appeal to the parties to abide by their commitments to continue the full implementation of the ceasefire and hostage release deal. He urges the parties to the conflict to respect the remains of the dead and return them to their relatives, consistent with applicable obligations under international humanitarian law and human rights law. We have long been calling for, as you know, the release of all hostages, a permanent ceasefire, and irreversible progress towards a 2-state solution.
I want to bring in now Adela Kojab, an Israeli legal advocate and media contributor. She joins us from New York. Adela, thank you for joining us on the program today. And I'm just wondering if you think the Hamas was being intentional about the mix-up of those bodies, or if this was an honest mistake that one of the bodies returned to Israel was not that of an Israeli hostage.
Of course, it's a good question. And of course, it's not something we can know for sure. But we've seen Hamas play mind games. For example, one of the hostages that they've released is Avir Medgidzu, who has been in Hamas captivity since 2014. So as much as we can think this might be an honest mistake, the Bibas children were taken with their mother. How do you confuse the woman who was holding the children with the body of another woman?
So it is, even if it is a mistake, well, given that they're returning these bodies under duress from the international community, which has succeeded in brokering the ceasefire deal that Israel is observing, the Prime Minister cited Hamas's unwillingness to keep terms of the agreement. Do you think that this was probably a move by Hamas in defiance of the Israeli Prime Minister, in defiance of the ceasefire deal, at least?
I think it is. I think that you said it very well. The ceasefire deal was brokered in duress from the international community. Hamas never wanted to end the war. Hamas does not want peace. Hamas is not looking for coexistence. Hamas is looking to extend the runway for them to be able to rebuild, to have another October 7th, which is something that they still celebrate till this day as a glorious moment of their revolution. So I think that switching the bodies is a way to desecrate the memory of the dead. And it's a way to, yes, defy the prime minister and to prompt any sort of Israeli response that would allow them to then respond and break the ceasefire. I do see this as a clear violation.
As an Israeli, what is the procedure? What happens after now Israel has received the bodies? I mean, there were people on the streets just to pay their last respects. The whole nation is saddened by what has happened. The fact that, hostages taken by Hamas were killed in captivity. The circumstances under which they were killed are still questionable. Hamas claims it was Israeli air fire. Israel claims they were shot point blank range by Hamas. What happens after now? What are the rights that the families have to go through, the community, everyone else?
Well, Yarden Bibas was the father of Kfir and Ariel. He was released earlier. So I think that for the Bibas family, it's going to be a very difficult road towards rebuilding. In terms of rights, I mean, I am a lawyer, and of course, there's the horrible terror of Hamas. There's UNRWA, who turned a blind eye. There's all the NGOs that might have known where the hostages were being held and didn't say anything. There's the international community who allowed this to go on. And then, of course, there's the failure of security by the Israeli government itself. I think that right now, what the Israeli people, the Jewish people around the world, and the families of the hostages want to do is rebuild their lives, find peace, and bring every single hostage home. For every hostage that we've had returned, there are still, about 69 that are being held in captivity, and every single one of them must return to their homes.
You talk about the irresponsibility, or rather the responsibility of the Israeli prime minister to have brought these hostages home alive. Do you, as well as other Israelis, blame the prime minister for what has happened?
Absolutely. In the Israeli public, there's a feeling of anger and helplessness. The feeling of, how did we allow this failure of security on October 7th? And how have we allowed this to continue for 500 days without the return of the hostages, and now receiving bodies of our hostages to be returned? I think that at the same time, the Israeli public does understand it's a difficult position. They don't blame Netanyahu for the return of the wrong body, but they do blame Netanyahu for the security failure and for the amount of time that it's taken to get to where we are.
Do you think that Prime Minister Netanyahu should call off the deal with Hamas as a result of, because of what has happened, the fact that the wrong body was sent? Israel, of course, does not trust Hamas, even though it says it will investigate, but who's there to hold Hamas accountable for that?
I think it matters what Hamas does next. I think that the change of body, I do believe, is a mind game by Hamas. But the question is, does Hamas want a ceasefire? Does Hamas want peace? Does Hamas want coexistence? And we know that the answer to that is no. So whether or not Prime Minister Netanyahu honors the ceasefire will do less. It will have less to do with the change of the body and the wrong body being returned, and a lot more to do with the intentions of Hamas and whether we see the ceasefire as a way for Hamas to release their own prisoners that have been held in Israeli prisons because of terror acts that they have committed, and as a way to rebuild, or whether we see the ceasefire as a way to build lasting peace. And I'm not sure where Prime Minister Netanyahu is sitting, but from the way that he addressed the nation, his heart hurts as much as ours. I think that there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of distrust, and I think that Hamas has shown that they're not a peace partner.
Do you think, Adela, that the Prime Minister should call off the ceasefire at this point? Hamas has violated the agreements of the peace deal. There are so many Palestinian prisoners given in exchange for these Israeli hostages, which seems a far stretch from what Hamas did on October 7. There are just very few number of Israelis who are held in captivity, but then so many Palestinians who are in prison in Israel. Some say this really isn't a fair deal.
It has never been a fair deal. It's never been a fair deal from the start, because again, they still see October 7th as a glorious day, and Israelis, it's their biggest day of mourning. So whether I think Prime Minister Netanyahu should call off the ceasefire depends on what the international community is looking to do. I think at this point, we're seeing a shift in the international community. We've been seeing circus after circus. Every time a hostage has been returned, they put on a parade and parade these women, old men, children, through Gaza, and they're being berated. And now what we're seeing is that when they're returning bodies, they're holding the same parade. And for the first time, the International Red Cross, who did not visit the hostages once during their 500 days of captivity, finally said that they would not partake in Hamas's speculations and Hamas's spectacle of the human remains that they were being returned. So I think that the world is starting to see that they've been supporting or they've been witnessing true barbaric actions by Hamas, true desecration of the memories of the dead, and again, like I said, someone who is not a peace partner in the peace process. So I think I can't say whether I think Netanyahu should call off the peace agreement, but I do think that the international community has to realize that there's one side here that's clearly looking to rebuild, find peace, and bring peace to their people, and it's not Hamas.
I remember months ago, when this was really in the news, the Israel-Hamas war divided a lot of Americans. There were so many protests in the schools, universities. Many were on Israel's side. A lot of people calling for a Palestinian state. What has been the mood like since then? Because all of the noise has quelled now. There is a new president in the United States. Has there been room for any of these protests to take place, or these conversations to hold in different fora?
Yes, the university protests are still ongoing. Even today in New York University, there was a sit-in inside of the library with students again calling for a free Palestine. At the same time, there has been a shift. And the main shift is that now that President Trump is in the executive office, the Department of Justice is looking to honor the Title VI agreements and to make sure that schools are being held accountable. So schools themselves are realizing that they can't allow the protests to go unchecked the way that they have. Jewish students and Zionist students have been feeling extremely unsafe. Buildings have been taken over, property has been damaged, and as much as we'd like to promote a healthy conversation, a lot of students found that they're not looking for that. At the same time, if you look at the ideology underneath it, I think the irony behind the protests in college campuses is that what they're fighting is in support of Hamas. They don't say we are fighting for the Palestinian people. They say we are Hamas. There is only one solution: intifada revolution, globalize the intifada. And if you speak to them and you ask them for a solution, they'll say something along the lines of a secular democratic state. And that's not what Hamas is fighting for. So I think university students are deeply misled. They think that they're fighting for freedom and justice when really they're upholding a torturous regime of Sharia law that's looking to continue this fight, even if it means that they're losing hundreds of thousands of their own people. Again, the administration has tightened their grip and college campuses are taking note. So I wouldn't say that the sentiment has changed in terms of the students, but the schools are finally looking to enforce the laws of the United States.
I hear some criticism for the international community in this. You said none of them visited any of the hostages while they were in captivity. Do you blame them for how Hamas has gone about this war and how they've gone about the handover of the hostages?
I think that for any country that's civilized, looking at the way that the International Red Cross and the international community has been handling the release of hostages, it should be heartbreaking and it should be scary. Because this was, again, a civilization, the state of Israel, an established Western country, a democracy that had its borders broken on October 7th, early in the morning, with thousands of terrorists breaking in, roaming the streets, breaking into homes to take living hostages. And it was a true act of barbarism. And then after that, we had the hostages held in Gaza for 16 months without a single visit from the international community. That should be a red flag for every Western nation to say, is this the kind of world that we're trying to build? If we're in favor of globalization and we keep calling ourselves the global community, what kind of global responsibility do we owe to each other? Or at least can the global community stand off of its high horse and admit its catastrophic failure when it comes to October 7th?
What do you think of President Trump offering to take over Gaza? He's asked for them to be evacuated, for the region, beg your pardon, to be evacuated, and for neighboring Arab countries to take in those refugees. What do you make of that?
I think that Trump isn't serious about taking over Gaza and moving all refugees. If you actually listen to the way that he's acted over the last 2-3 weeks that he's been in office, he makes these grand statements saying this is the extreme I could take this to, but it's a negotiation tactic to bring people to the table. In this case, it's not to bring Hamas to the table. Instead, he says that he will bus the population of Gaza to Egypt and to Jordan. And essentially what he's saying is the United States has to clean up this mess with Israel, of course. But the Middle East can't just wash their hands. Jordan and Egypt played a part in this just as much, and it's their responsibility as much as the global community to make sure that we can reach peace and rebuild Gaza together. So I don't think that Trump is taking over Gaza. I think what he's saying is we are willing to if the international community doesn't come to the table. At the same time, how do we rebuild Gaza if Hamas is still in power? How do we ensure that the terror network tunnels that are underneath Gaza, that hundreds of thousands of dollars of aid, of international aid, that should have been going to the people of Gaza to build their lives, went into building these tunnels? How do we ensure that those tunnels aren't rebuilt? So it is a difficult question where you say, if I don't have a partner in the peace process, but I'm looking to broker peace, how do we assure that that peace process isn't disrupted? And again, it's a difficult solution. But no, I think it is a negotiation tactic. And again, Israel can't be a passive partner in this, right? When Trump set the deadline for 12 o'clock on Saturday for all hostages to be released, they only released 4 hostages. And Israel decided to continue with the phased out deal to receive the bodies of the Bibas, of Ohad Lifshitz, and of course, of the hostages that are still remaining. So I think that we're seeing that as much as the United States is trying to have a hard line as a negotiation tactic, Israel cares so much about its people and about its hostages that it's willing to continue with Hamas's shenanigans in order to receive them back.
Andela, thank you again for joining us on the program. Appreciate your analysis.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Now, on the other side of the war in Gaza, top officials of the International Organization for Migration have just visited the southern region to observe the scale-up of humanitarian operations to meet the immense needs of people who have endured more than 500 days of unimaginable hardship. Director General Amy Pope and Humanitarian Coordinator for the occupied Palestinian territory, Muhannad Hadi, met with families who've been sleeping in makeshift shelters, bombed out buildings, or out in the open exposed to winter rain, wind, and cold. As people return to their home areas across Gaza, entire communities are coming back during the ceasefire to find their residences reduced to rubble. With nearly 90% of homes destroyed, hundreds of thousands are left to go nowhere, adding to the misery of basic necessities and essential services that have been scarce or non-existent.
I'm in Khan Yunis in Gaza, where the sheer level of destruction all around me is overwhelming. With the ceasefire finally in place, many families are finally able to come home only to find that nothing is left. IOM, with our partners, has been providing shelter, sanitation, and hygiene supplies and emergency relief to support Palestinians inside Gaza since October 2023. It's critical that there is coordinated efforts to deliver life-saving aid where it's so desperately needed. And for this to succeed, all parties must uphold the ceasefire and ensure safe conditions for sustained humanitarian relief.
Meanwhile, the United Nations Population Fund, the UNFPA, Regional Director for the Arab States, Layla Bakers, visited women at a makeshift health center in Al-Auda, Jabalia, northern Gaza. This center, housed in a tent, was set up after the ceasefire with UNFPA support to respond to an increase in demand for maternity care. The women there described the pain of giving birth without medical care or shelter to protect their newborn babies or food to ease their hunger.
This is a makeshift center that was set up last week by our partners here in Jabalia camp. It's an attempt to reestablish health facilities under the desperate circumstances that the women and girls of Gaza, and in particular in Jabalia camp, have witnessed over the last 16 months. To say that I can understand the pain that comes with the level of destruction that I've witnessed over the course of the last 24 hours is an underestimate. I've heard stories from women about their migration, their forced displacement, the destruction of their homes, the loss of their loved ones, their inability to access even basic health care. And yet, they stay, they are committed to rebuilding Gaza, and they count on the services that UNFPA and its partners deliver. After the ceasefire, there's a little bit of hope that out of the dust and the rubble Once it is cleared, we can begin to rebuild not only the buildings and the facilities that are so necessary for safe delivery, for provision of maternal health care, for providing the mental health services for young people and women and girls everywhere across the Gaza Strip after this extraordinary catastrophe, but also to provide the hope that will allow for Gaza to reestablish itself. We are committed at UNFPA to doing just that.
Tensions remain high between world leaders after U.S. President Donald Trump moved to begin peace talks with Russia that did not involve European leaders. In an address to the nation last night, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said, we all need peace. He was speaking after talks in Kyiv with U.S. envoy Keith Kellogg, which he says have restored hope. He's also called for strong agreements with America as his country needs reliable and clear guarantees. More now on that press briefing with White House Security Advisor Mike Waltz in Washington. Waltz says Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky needs to return to the negotiating table and strike a deal on U.S. access to Ukraine's critical minerals. President Zelensky on Wednesday rejected U.S. demands for a share of its rare earth minerals, a deal that Trump said would reflect the amount of aid that the U.S. had provided to Ukraine during its war with Russia. Comments made at a White House briefing on Thursday overshadowed a meeting in Kyiv between Zelensky and Keith Kellogg, the U.S. chief envoy to Ukraine. Ukraine holds huge deposits of critical minerals and elements, including lithium and titanium, as well as a sizable coal deposition, gas, oil, and uranium deposits, a supply worth billions of dollars.
We're going to continue to have, he needs to come back to the table, and we're going to continue to have discussions about where that deal is going. Again, we have an obligation to the taxpayer. I think this is an opportunity. The president thinks this is an opportunity for Ukraine going forward. There can be, in my view, nothing better for Ukraine's future and for their security than to have the United States invested in their prosperity long term. And then a key piece of this has also been security guarantees. Look, the reality that we're talking about here is it in Ukraine's interest? Is it in Europe's interest? It certainly isn't in Russia's interest or in the American people's interest for this war to grind on forever and ever and ever. So a key part of his conversation was helping President Zelensky understand this war needs to come to an end. This kind of open-ended mantra that we've had under the Biden administration, that's over. And I think a lot of people are having a hard time accepting that. And then the other piece is there's been discussions from Prime Minister Starmer and also President Macron about European-led security guarantees. We welcome that. We've been asking Europe to step up and secure its own prosperity, safety, and security. So we certainly welcome that, and we certainly welcome more European assistance. As I told my counterparts, come to the table with more if you want a bigger seat at the table. And we've been asking for that for quite some time. Well, the National Security Advisor Mike Waltz was asked about the war in Ukraine and whether Trump could be the subject of manipulation by Russian President Vladimir Putin. Waltz replied that if there's anybody in this world who can go toe-to-toe with the Russian president, it is Donald Trump, referring to him as the deal-maker-in-chief. What a month, and what a sea change in our foreign policy. In addition to what we're doing on the border and restoring American sovereignty, in addition to what we're doing in our economy and the job creation and the inflation reduction, we are bringing the world back to where it was at the end of President Trump's first term, which is a world of peace, prosperity, and looking forward and getting us out of the chaos that we've just seen over the last 4 years. So over the last month, just to name a few, I had the honor of sitting in the Oval Office as President Trump spoke with President Putin. and then immediately spoke with President Zelensky. And both of them said only President Trump could bring both sides to the table, and only President Trump could stop the horrific fighting that has been going on now for the better part of 4 years, and that only President Trump could drive the world back to peace. Both of those leaders said that in back-to-back calls. And of course, we just had our historic talks mediated by our good friends and partners, Saudi Arabia. We give great thanks to Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman for hosting, and sat down for the first time in years with the Russians and talked about a path forward with peace. On top of that, and one of the things that led to that was the tremendous confidence building measure that we had with the release of Mark Fogel.
And in Europe, Germany's Christian Democratic Union frontrunner Friedrich Merz says the American security guarantees can no longer be relied upon, warning that Europe should hope for the best but prepare for the worst. Merz was reacting to recent comments between the US and Ukraine during one of the party's final campaign events in Berlin on Thursday. According to him, the worst thing that could happen is that Europeans will now finally and definitely have to take the security of the continent into their own hands. Merz also raised concerns about the rift within the North Atlantic Treaty Organization that is deeply posing a threat to the future of the alliance. The German elections take place February 23rd. They were triggered by the collapse of Chancellor Olaf Scholz's traffic light coalition following a number of budget rows and other issues, including funding for Ukraine.
Da verändert sich im Augenblick etwas.
So we're counting down to the elections in Germany, which happen in just 2 days now. They'll head to polls. The snap election was called because the current coalition government collapsed in December of last year. This vote is very different from the last, as right-wing parties have climbed up in opinion polls. What are some of the concerns for many German citizens, and what are the businesses or the markets expecting? For more on this, we're joined by the DW's Vada Imran in Berlin. Vada, great to see you. Do give us the latest. What are you expecting in the next few days?
Hi, thanks for having me. Yes, this is a big election for Germany as the mainstream parties like the CDU, which was Angela Merkel's party, and the SPD, which is current Chancellor Olaf Scholz's party, and the Greens race to secure a spot at the top. Far-right AfD is polling currently as number 2. So Germans will head to the polls on Sunday to vote, and we expect clarity by Monday itself. It seems the most likely outcome will be another tough coalition here in Germany. All signs and surveys are pointing to a conservative-led coalition, which will see the CDU on top, but needing the support of others to form a proper government. This will be a big task because these big parties disagree on some of the most fundamental aspects, like the debate yesterday, which was about whether combustion engine cars should be banned or not. None of these parties want to work with the far-right AfD. So for now, it seems the far-right party will not be making the government. But we will definitely see negotiations and talks, which might take months to decide. The last time it took 3 months from the vote to a coalition to be formed and for Olaf Scholz to be named chancellor.
Let's talk about the voters now. What are their priorities? What are they looking for in the next government?
Yes, there's a long list of priorities, but the economy has been a top concern. According to a new survey, voters in February prioritized security and peace as their biggest concern ahead of going to the polls. The economy was a very close second, and social justice and equality was third. Migration is still a very hot topic here, but I think recent geopolitical events like U.S. President's comments on Ukraine, potential threats from Russia have reactivated related security concerns. But if we go and look into the nitty-gritty, some of my colleagues have been traveling around Germany and spoke to families in the eastern state of Thuringia, for example, and people there are still very much concerned about working reduced hours on reduced pay. There are job cuts, even for the most skilled, educated engineers. There's little to no support for single parents. So these are some of the very important concerns that we've been hearing out of the eastern part of the country. Over in Munich, the concerns range from housing concerns because of very high prices for apartments, lack of investments in infrastructure, and these seem to be the things that people there are going to vote off of. Either way, everyone across the country agrees that the salaries are not enough to cover the high cost of living. So regular voters are hoping for some relief from the next government on these crucial areas of concern.
So I heard you say the economy is a big concern for many, but how are businesses and markets viewing this election?
Yes, I think German businesses are looking for more than just a policy change. They are hoping for a revamp of the entire economic system. And on top of the list of demands is a cut in German bureaucracy. According to economic think tank IFO in Munich, German businesses spend around 65 billion euros annually on documentation, planning, and the process of obtaining certificates. This is a very expensive process that needs to be streamlined, because it is one of the pain points of local businesses here. So companies are hoping that whoever forms the next government will be looking to find a way to reduce energy costs, lower taxes, and help restart Germany's dwindling exports. Big legacy sectors like the car industry or metal or chemical industry have shed jobs in 2024, leaving many employees here worried. There's also a dire need for innovation. Germany is home to some of the biggest global names, but many businesses are now considering offshoring some of their research and development departments. So businesses and markets alike are hoping for a business-friendly government that will prioritize them first.
Avada, thank you so much for speaking with us on The World Today. In South Korea, supporters of the former President Yoon Suk-yeol have gathered in protest outside the Seoul Central District Court, demanding his release and criticizing what they call an unjust detention. It comes as Mr. Yoon appeared in court for his first trial hearing on charges of insurrection in the country's first criminal prosecution of an incumbent leader. Demonstrators waved South Korean and U.S. flags, chanted slogans, echoing calls for justice and what they allege is a politically motivated trial. Yoon declared martial law in a shock address to the nation on the evening of December 3rd in what appeared to be an attempt to crack down on his political opponents. The declaration was short-lived but plunged South Korea into political turmoil. And at least 7 people have died after a massive explosion inside a house in eastern rural Idlib, northwest Syria. Officials say the blast was caused by remnants of war stored inside the house. According to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, the number of casualties is expected to increase as there are missing persons and critically injured victims. The house is said to belong to a person who worked in collecting and selling war remnants as scrap. Since the beginning of 2025, the number of people killed due to explosions caused by remnants of the Syrian war has reached 195, including 35 children and 7 women. Additionally, 236 others have been injured, including 103 children and 3 women. Today, U.S. President Donald Trump has hosted a reception celebrating Black History Month at the White House. The events, which took place on Thursday, honor the contributions of Black Americans to the nation's history. Trump said a statue park he's calling the National Garden of American Heroes he intends to build at a yet-to-be-determined site will include representations of countless Black American icons, such as Harriet Tubman, Rosa Parks, Billie Holiday, Aretha Franklin, Coretta Scott King, Frederick Douglass, Jackie Robinson, Martin Luther King Jr., Muhammad Ali, and Kobe Bryant. Prominent attendees at the East Room event included Tiger Woods, Republican Senator Tim Scott, Representative John James, and conservative podcast host Sage Steele, as well as Alice Johnson, a woman pardoned by Trump in 2020 after being sentenced to life in prison for cocaine trafficking.
But let me ask you, is there anybody like our Tiger? How are you? He's a great. Would you want to just say a couple of words, Tiger? He doesn't. He's much more comfortable. Tiger.
Hey, it's an honor to be here. It's an honor to be here with you, Mr. President, and to be on the road here with all of you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Love you too.
And I want to thank all of you very much for being here. Welcome to the White House, and we proudly celebrate Black History Month. How are you, darling? Today we pay tribute to the generations of black legends, champions, warriors, and patriots who helped drive our country forward to greatness. And you really are great people. What a great, nice group of... I have some people in front of me every once in a while with all the problems that are caused all over the world. They're not nice. They're not nice. And but we're making them nice, I can tell you that, and we're making them nice rapidly. During Black History Month, we pay tribute to these heroes and to so many others, but not simply because they're black heroes, but also because they are truly American heroes who inspire all of us, very much so. The theme of this year's celebration is African Americans and labor. And we want to thank all of the black workers, construction workers, and every other worker. They do a job like nobody can do, and we want to just thank them very much for their contribution.
Well, the U.S. president has not given up his dream of making neighboring Canada a 51st state. Trump reiterated his call to make Canada a 51st state during a speech to the Republican Governors Association meeting in Washington, D.C. On the same day, Canada beat the United States to win the Four Nations hockey tournament with a tense action on the ice, mirroring the political tensions bubbling between the two countries. The
Climate Accord, it's a one-way... You know, under that accord, we pay $1 trillion. Think of it. We pay $1 trillion. They pay nothing. China doesn't pay anything. India doesn't pay anything. Russia doesn't pay. We just pay everybody. It's like a health organization. They get 95% of their product from the United States. I think they have to become the 51st state. And you heard the people booing the national anthem, but I think ultimately they'll be praising the national anthem. We'll have to work out some deal with it, because I do like the O Canada, right? It's a beautiful thing. I think we're going to have to keep it for the 51st state. I call him Governor Trudeau. I said, Governor Trudeau's doing a wonderful job. I think it's actually cost him his election, if you want to know the truth. But we're gonna see about that. We're looking at Greenland, and we have to take back the Panama Canal, because that wasn't the deal. We gave the Panama Canal and they're getting almost $1 million a ship. And their product is water. It's Pacific and Atlantic where they meet, and one is about 18 feet higher than the other, which a lot of people don't know. Actually, it's one of the great marvels of the world. Well, we built it, and we're not going to because China has essentially taken it over. We're not going to let that happen. China knows it, and so does Panama. And we have a fight with one news organization, AP, a radical left organization, treats us all very badly.
U.S. President Donald Trump, as the world grapples with pressing issues like climate change, geopolitical tensions, and poverty, South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa has emphasized the lack of global consensus in addressing these challenges. He was addressing the G20 Foreign Ministers meeting in Johannesburg. Our South Africa correspondent Innocent Amosa has more.
South Africa is hosting the G20 Foreign Ministers meeting. President Cyril Ramaphosa believes the country's G20 presidency is a vital platform to spotlight Africa and the Global South's priorities on the global development agenda.
Africa is home to some of the world's fastest growing economies, and in many ways faces unique challenges such as the impact of climate change, developmental needs that it has, and the effects of global trade dynamics. This summit's location underscores the need for African voices to be heard.
He, however, highlighted the lack of global consensus in tackling today's challenges.
There is a lack of consensus amongst major powers, including in the G20, on how to respond to these issues of global significance. Extreme poverty and growing inequality within and among nations weigh heavily on the conscience of the world.
Ramaphosa stressed that the G20 must align with the aspirations and needs of people, focusing on addressing inflation, trade disruption, and the debt relief for developing nations, particularly in Africa. The president also engaged members of the media and explained why the budget was not tabled yesterday. In light of the current geopolitical tensions between South Africa and the United States of America, Ramaphosa says his cabinet will continue to engage President Donald Trump.
Well, we do know now that America is actually represented in this ministerial G20, but not at the highest level. With the finance track G20 ministers on the horizon, the question remains, will America be part of that one as well? From Johannesburg, South Africa, Innocent Samosa, Channels Television News.
Here in Lagos, the British High Commission, or Deputy High Commission, has been celebrating the homecoming of some of the brightest minds in Nigeria as they return home after a period of study in the UK. The newly returned Chevening and Commonwealth scholars were honoured at a special ceremony in Lagos. Our correspondent, Layo Olarinde, has more.
Since September 2023, these Nigerians left the motherland to pursue different degrees in the United Kingdom under the Chevening and Commonwealth scholarships. Now they are back to put what they have learned to good use for their country. The British Deputy High Commissioner, Mr. Johnny Baxter, welcomes these outstanding scholars.
I spoke to you when you were leaving about, as Boma has said, returning particularly, and returning to contribute to your chosen field, and returning to contribute to Nigeria. And it is brilliant to see you back. And I've already started hearing from a few of you what your plans are, and I'm looking forward to hearing from more of you what your plans are. And it's always a pleasure to see alumni here who are contributing in so many and such significant ways to Nigeria.
The scholars' research areas range from education and healthcare to sustainable development and technology. Their work has the potential to address some of the country's most pressing challenges.
As a practitioner, I simply want to be contributing to the realistic practice of what it means to create an energy base that also saves the environment. It's as simple as that for me.
It was a great learning experience to not just learn from educators that were just lecturers. They were actively practicing in the industry, and I think it was a privilege for me to be around them, to learn from them. But it was also quite symbiotic because they did respect the fact that I was coming from somewhere different, and my exposure to performance art was very different from what they were teaching because it was very Western. And so there was a level of respect for my experience as well, which I really appreciated. And I did finish with a distinction.
When I got to England, courtesy of Chevening, I actually had a different perspective. Yes, I now have a template, a mental template of how system should work and on how to channel and strategize my advocacy going forward.
Mr. Johnny Baxter says even though the UK has given this opportunity, every country has its own challenges which can be overcome with the right mindset.
The grass is not always greener on the other side. And it may sound really strange that someone in my position is in some ways pleased to talk about tough things that have happened in my country. But I think it makes sense, because I know that many of you will have lived through, particularly if you were in Lagos, will have lived through some pretty tough events in Lagos in recent memory as well. And I'm sure that over time there will always be things that slightly shock us that happen in our own countries. But it's worth remembering that those things can happen anywhere in the world. And the key question is how a country deals with it, how a country responds, and how a population responds.
The Chevening and Commonwealth Scholarships are prestigious awards that recognize exceptional academic talent and leadership potential. The next few weeks, months, or years will tell the impact the education in UK will have on these scholars and the nation. Layo Olarinde, Channels Television News.
Well, this is where we anchor the bulletin. Thousands of people at the Putin's Lantern Festival, all waiting to witness performers bravely ascend a 17-meter knife heavenly ladder, an awe-inspiring part of the city's annual New Year ritual. The crowd watches a performer climbs the ladder barefoot. Later on, participants jump over a large bonfire, take part in traditional rituals, and march through the town while playing musical instruments. The custom dates back to more than 500 years to the Ming Dynasty, originating as a response to frequent attacks by Japanese pirates on Putin's coastal areas. Defenders used knife ladders to observe enemy movements. Well, everything else you should not try at home, except, of course, the eating. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani.